talking 1031 Part 3. And this is an anthology movie, obviously the third part of this kind of low-budget horror anthology franchise. I have actually reviewed the previous two entries to this this franchise. Please do go and check those reviews out. 1031, obviously the American way of saying the 31st of October. The rest of the world doesn't really make sense, but there you go. It's an American release. So this is a low-budget anthology movie. We have 4 kind of films. The total runtime of this movie is about 80 minutes, so it's not a long one. As well as the 4 short stories, you've got a couple of kind of faux trailers, and you've also got Jennifer Nangle's kind of like Elvira type horror host that kind of introduces and kind of sees out the movie as well. So we won't talk too much about the kind of the trailers and that sort of thing because they're only a few minutes of kind of runtime. We will talk a little bit about the 4 movies and we'll kind of discuss them, and then there's the kind of the package as a whole. So the first movie is essentially about a guy who is setting up this kind of like a Halloween house of horrors. At the same time, he's kind of splitting up with his girlfriend and they're not getting on. And he goes to the local thrift store and ends up buying this kind of mummy life-size statue that he kind of wants to put in his horror house. But this kind of mummy might be a little bit more than just a statue, as it tends to have a soul of its own and kind of comes alive. So that's your kind of your basic premise here. Obviously these are all short films, so there's not a huge amount of plot in them. What did I think worked in this one? So the actual mummy kind of puppet is quite fun. You can kind of get away with it looking a little hokey because it's meant to be a kind of a display piece. It's meant to be a statue. It's not meant to be an actual mummy, but it does seem to be possessed. So you can kind of, in a way, it has that excuse for not looking like super kind of realistic. But even so, I do think it looks kind of quite fun. It has these kind of electronic kind of glowing eyes and things like that. So I actually do think the actual the mummy creature in this one actually looks kind of effective, and the actual the idea here that it's a kind of a Halloween decoration come to life almost makes it more scary in a way than if it were an actual kind of like Egyptian, you know, mummy and things like that. And it points to this kind of larger mythology, which is kind of interesting, you know, what's actually kind of possessing it. It does seem to be the conduit for some type of kind of entity. It never really tells you too much. It's a kind of tongue-in-cheek movie, this one. We have this kind of arguing couple, and there's some kind of fun, silly moments. It is obviously very kind of low budget, but it's kind of fun. And like I said, I did quite like the aesthetics of this one. And it's kind of has this this haunted house, Halloween kind of style kind of attraction thing going for it, which I think is quite fun. That's the kind of the positives. Negatives wise, as with all of 4 of these stories, the actual kind of story here is very slight. So much so that I think this and the other 2 movies that come after this are incredibly light on plot. Even for an anthology short film, it's more or less just kind of like the setup and then there's the payoff, and that's kind of it. There's really no depth in any story here. So it's not exactly a thrilling story from a narrative sense. I mean, that's the downside with an anthology because you've only got a short time, but some still manage to have twists and kind of surprises. These films don't. They're just a simple setup and then you have the payoff. That's it. The acting's a little hokey. Like I said, this one's meant to be a little tongue-in-cheek, so it's kind of a little bit, goofy, shall we say, in its kind of acting style. Not particularly kind of realistic, over-the-top sort of characters. Although I quite like the kind of the mummy aesthetic. I think the actual kills and the gore here are on the weaker side. So, you know, it's much of nothing much. It's a bit fluff, this one. There's nothing real, there's no real meat on the bones. I quite like the aesthetics. And that's kind of it. You know, the 2 characters arguing is kind of funny in a way, but there's not a huge amount to it. The second sort of short film is, I would say, probably the most pure horror. Has the most horror elements in it, in a way. We have this kind of house which has been sold, and there seems to be a serial killer that some people thought was dead that has been hiding in this house. And you know, we have the kind of like the realtor go in, and there's kind of like someone else that's cleaning up, and then we have the actual kind of couple and things like this, and they all come and face this kind of this serial killer. And he's got quite a cool aesthetic. He looks kind of pretty freaky, and his kind of MO, his kind of the way he kills people are, generally speaking, door-related deaths is the best way I've described it. The movie is called The Locksmith, so he kind of uses, you know, like door handles and things like that, and you know, the sort of screws within doors. So it's kind of fun, and like I said, this one is treated a little more seriously. It doesn't have that kind of that goofy tone that the first one did. The gore here is actually reasonable. There's for a low budget movie, there's actually some quite kind of like brutal kind of death scenes. Again, the problem is here, there's no real story. It's the setup. There's this there's this serial killer who's been thought was dead. He's back. There's a bunch of victims. That's it. No real plot here. There's also an extraordinary obvious foreshadowing in this particular short film. You know, we have this girl, and she's going to a Halloween party, and her boyfriend keeps repeating, "Don't forget to bring the sword. Don't forget to bring the sword." Oh, I wonder if that sword will come in handy. So, you know, again, it's plot-wise, narrative-wise, there's nothing to it. It's just a simple kind of like A to B storyline. But it does have a little bit of edge to it, this one. The killer looks kind of quite cool. And I will say that this one has that, a little bit of a genuine kind of horror feel to it. The third one is similar in a way. It's about a bunch of kind of seemingly way too old trick-or-treaters. Adult people who are going around trick-or-treating or whatever. Seemingly looking very too old to do that sort of thing, but there you go. And they decide to break into this kind of like this mean old guy's house that's, you know, the kind of tradition to kind of go and sort of like tease him or what have you. Whilst they're in there, they find out he's doing some despicable things in his dungeon. Again, there's a couple of decent kind of props in this one, lots of kind of like severed limbs and things like that, and there's a couple of okay kind of gore scenes and kill scenes in this one, which are done relatively well. And our killer, I think, is meant to be an old man, or I'm not sure if he's meant to be an old someone else who's wearing like the mask of an old man. I couldn't really tell what the movie was trying to kind of present in regards to this kind of antagonist, because it's obviously a younger guy wearing a mask of an older man, but I wasn't sure if that was what it was portraying, or whether we were meant to believe this was actually just like an older guy, in which case why did you just hire an older actor? I didn't really understand where that was going, because the setup is that he is actually an older man. So if it is, the character is meant to be an old man, it really looks like he's just wearing an old man mask. Anyway, the problem with this one is it takes so long to, I mean, bear in mind this is a short film, but it feels like half a film is these four friends arguing about what to do. And then they kind of go into the house and, you know, they almost immediately find problems there and get killed off one by one. So it just seems to squander its already kind of short running time by having this quite long sequence where we have these four characters kind of argue and bicker for, you know, probably a third of the actual runtime before we even get into the actual kind of story, which could have been a little bit more in regards to plot once we get into this house. It just seemed to squander its already kind of short running time. This one really didn't have, again, it didn't really have any type of memorability in regards to any type of plot. It's very like the other two before it, a simple setup and then kind of like then a payoff. That is it. So that's three stories really that have no real story kind of narrative through line. It's very simple. The fourth one, out of all of them, the story of this one is the most interesting, but this is the shortest film. Now this one, it almost feels like you're coming in partway through a story. So the setup here is we have a group of girls who already know that there's something demonic within this box and they want to ultimately kill it. So we have this one, it starts with this one girl driving to deliver this box to these other 3 girls, and they're going to kind of set this trap and then try and kill whatever's in the box. And that's where it starts. So you've obviously meant to believe there's things have happened before this that have led to this point, but we don't see that. Now this made this movie the most different in regards to to narrative, and I actually thought the acting was probably the best in this section. But it's a very short film. This out of all 4 of them, this is the shortest. And then we kind of get the box opening, and there's a creature in there, and I will applaud them for having imagination, practical effects, but it looks like a kind of just a puppet, to be honest. But there are some okay deaths in this one. And again, the practical makeup that they've used here, I think that kind of the showdown with the creature and these girls looks pretty good. There's a couple of there's a kind of a possession thing that goes on as well, which I did think looked pretty good. So I personally feel this is the strongest, but it's the shortest, and I think had the most interesting limited plot, so to speak. So all of these films are very low budget though. This is very much a very low budget, shoestring kind of indie production. So don't be expecting, creep show or anything like that. It's not that level of film. Now, when you have a low budget, I think you can you can still get up there if you have good ideas and stuff, and you can still get up there if you have, good writing or some interesting angles, some things you haven't seen before. The issue with this film, although I think there are some fun elements within these kind of 4 stories, narratively, even the last one, there's still so little to it. There's so little meat on the bones of these films, and it's not making strides forwards in regards to acting or VFX. There's what it does have is still kind of low budget, that indie kind of made for a few $1,000s look to it. So I don't think this movie ever really excelled in any way, and even I think the first movie, the first 1031 movie, seemed to have a far higher production value than this one, and the second one was quite cheap as well, to be fair. But the first one I felt had a little bit more kind of production value in it, but this one certainly seems extraordinarily cheap. And the biggest downside for me is that these stories are just so kind of sparse in regards to any type of narrative. There's really nothing to them. There's not really one story here which has an interesting hook, an interesting angle. There's just some kind of fun setups, and then you kind of have people get killed. That's it. That's all 4 of these films. So there needs to be more variety, I would suggest. They need to have different types of things going on. It's more or less something's evil, bunch of people get killed at the end. Times 4 in a low budget movie with some kind of faux trailers. Yeah, it's kind of, I can't really recommend this one. It's a fun watch. It's a very forgettable watch. If you like low budget, but it's so short. It's kind of like little vignettes. You can pop them on and kind of watch it in the background. But it's not something I would suggest really getting too excited about. I'll give it a 4 out of 10 because there are some bits and pieces, some practical effects that I did kind of like here and there. But it's nothing to write home about. 4 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time.